There we have it. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Carlos De Las Heras. I'm a software developer, web developer from Madrid, Spain. I've been doing Django for almost 4 years. This is my third DjangoCon and the first as a speaker. And I'm really excited to be here with you all. I'm a bit nervous, and you will see my face blushing all along the conference. Like when it's already red, I'm be finishing. So you know, okay. So, well, I work for a small startup back in Madrid. The core is big data analysis and intelligence. I'm in charge of software products. First of all, I would like to thank my mentors, Ashley Kamba and Andrew Godwin, for helping me with this pitch. Without them, I wouldn't be working, without Ashley, I wouldn't be working with Django. Without Andrew, I wouldn't have this pitch at all. So thanks for them, guys. And especially, I also like to thank you all and thank the organization for this wonderful organization. Yep. So first of all, I would like us to start remembering the year 2003. This is the year that Django first came to be. The set of technologies and web development techniques known as Ajax existed, but till 2005, the name Ajax wasn't really stated. Till 2006, we didn't have a jQuery, for example. We have to remember that in year 2003, it was like the pre-iPhone era, so to say. Like iPhone didn't come out in 2007, and mobile phones were basically for calls and SMSs. This is the time that Internet Explorer reigned supreme. It was the time of IE6. And for frameworks, we had basically PHP and SOAP for Python. In 2003, web pages like MySpace, iTunes, WordPress, and LinkedIn launched. And we have to remember that also like Gmail didn't come out till 2004, and YouTube didn't come out till 2005. So things have changed quite a lot since then. We're now in year 2017. That's 14 years internet time, which is quite a lot. And lots of things have happened. Now we have single-page applications, mobile native apps. We've got APIs everywhere, even if they are for third parties or it's an API you have for your own front end. We're talking about intermittent connections because of mobile networks and lots of connections everywhere. We're talking about weird stuff like bots, web sockets, blockchain, concurrency. There's JavaScript everywhere. Now there's also JavaScript in the server. And well, we've got interesting new players like Node, Go, Phoenix, and Angular and React for front ends. So we've come a long way. Really? Really? Okay. I thought this was gonna work offline, but kind of Google played it on me. Okay. let me try something. Yeah, it worked now? Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. So we've moved, we've seen like a move of the computing power from the server to the client. And this allows for full-blown applications to work on our devices. We've got computers in our pockets right now. So we've moved from this traditional life cycle where we make an HTTP request and get an HTML back, and then we make another request like a form post, and we get another HTML back, which renders a refresh in your browser. But now we've got this new life cycle, the SPA life cycle, this single page application life cycle, which enables an HTTP request to you will get an app back. It's basically a bundle, HTML and JavaScript bundle, and from then on, this application living in your client will make requests, AJAX requests, to the server, and you would get JSON, which is basically a key value data dictionary. So that's really small and really light. This would be like the download and request timeline. Would typically Django use this. We had HTML pages when we moved on along the URL. So when you hit an URL, you get an HTML. When you hit another URL, you would get another HTML render template, etc., etc. This would be what would happen with the SPA life cycles, where you would get a big download, basically the whole bundle at the beginning, and then you would do JSON requests, which are much smaller, AJAX requests with JSON payloads, which are much smaller. And we also have, this is what we call eager loading, basically loading the whole app at the beginning, but you can also have this intermediate solution where you would just download a smaller part, like the basic part of the application, and when you navigate within the URLs of the application, you navigate to a certain module, you would download that chunk. Because it enables full duplex communication over a single TCP connection without enables real-time in your apps. So as I said in this first part, we see we have new paradigms, and these new paradigms always pose new challenges. Django was created at the beginning to solve its own problems, its own challenges. It was devised to meet the fast-moving deadlines of newsrooms, to provide easy database interaction, pluggability, reusability, mature middlewares, a mature MVC model, etc., etc. So we've got an amazing ORM, an amazing admin. Yeah, so it's been changing along all this time, no? But certainly along 14 internet years, some of those features may not be that useful anymore. And here I'm talking about template rendering, especially if you can have a full-blown application on your laptop, on your mobile phone, and users expect no refreshes, expect dynamic experiences with their interfaces, etc. So I realized that this is like a new paradigm, something that people would expect. And being that I've been working with Django for 3 or 4 years, I knew how to work with the basic templating engine. But I said, why not try and work on a project with where I had an API and an SPA, a single-page application, all the way, being an API done in Django and an SPA done in Angular 2, just as a proof of concept. And this is something that happened, these really scarce times where you have time to do whatever you want in your company and people won't say anything about your decisions. So I had this time to make this proof of concept. And that's what I did. I started working with my colleagues back at my company, at Quantum Analytics, in this project, which is called Value Home. It's basically a real estate app where you would find your real estate and you would get appraisal price and lots of information about your real estate. That's basically it. So these are the requirements. As I said, those requirements are something I could set myself. It's a real estate app. As I said, we wanted it to be mobile first, and thinking about the possibility of doing a native app for Android or iPhone in the future. We knew that it had to consume diverse APIs. We will see further on that it should allow users to log in, allow these users to register with an email verification, and I wanted it to be bleeding edge Django and bleeding edge Angular 2 and Material 2, just because I could. So this is the structure. What you would do is make this HTTP request to the root of the domain, and you will get the Angular app. I'm using lazy loading, but it's basically that. And from then on, requests from the application where you would navigate along these URLs in the Angular 2 app. This would generate AJAX calls to the server. I'm using Nginx as a proxy for Django, so all calls starting with API are sent to Django, and Django has an API. And well, as I told, it's JSON. I'm using several APIs from third parties. This is like the official real estate registry in Spain, and it's painful somehow. The appraisals API that we worked on with Flask. It's a small API that could be used by third parties for appraisals of their own real estates, and the Google API. So this is the toolbox I've been using, the most relevant, at least. Of course, Django REST Framework. And for authentication, I'm using Django REST Framework JWT, and REST-Auth for registration and OAuth. And I'm also going to be speaking a bit about this package for managing cross-origin request sharing. So some observations. I'm using HTTPS everywhere. I shouldn't stress that much. It's important. The API design minimizes calls from the front end. Basically, this API is not for third parties, the one that my app is using. So we try to minimize the calls that the front end makes to this backend. Forms are not really forms in our front end application in Angular. Forms are basically a way of gathering information, and then we've got services that manage to gather that information and generate application JSON content type requests. And it's important to handle all possible exceptions because, well, I think most of you know, but we have these times where you make a request, you get a 500 error, and basically you get a spinner there for the end of eternity. So that's not good. Sorry, I'm going to drink some water. Oh. So authentication and permissions. I'm using Django REST Framework JWT. I will tell you why I'm decided that. I'm using this isAuthenticated class as the basic of permission class for Django REST Framework, and this is the way you would specify the authentication classes. We also have in Django REST Framework you have session authentication, basic authentication, and other token authentications, but I'm using the JSON Web Token authentication provided by Django REST Framework. This is the way you handle permissions. As the default permission is authenticated for defaults. If I wanted a view to be used by unauthenticated requests, I use these permission classes provided by Django REST Framework. This is the case of a function-based view, and this is the case of a class-based view. So JSON Web Tokens. These are interesting because they provide a stateless authentication mechanism. So no session and no cookies are involved. They are signed, so they can be decoded and checked for validity. Basically, Django encodes a token with the secret key. That's something that the front end can decode but can't encode again. So there would be no tampering possible. But all the information is there. So you would get this token in your authorization header in your requests with this schema, which could be bear or JWT or clown if you want it. Just that's something you can define. And Django REST Framework JWT provides these settings variable where you can define the schema, expiration of the token, refresh windows, and the leeway. So this is JWT JSON Web Token. It's a long string of numbers and letters. Has 3 parts: a header, a payload, and a signature. And this payload, as I said, can be decoded by the front end, and you will have all this information, which has information on the user that's registered, logged in, expiration, issue that information. So the front end can handle itself the expiration of the session, so to say. So how would you log in? Logging in is basically obtaining a token. The front end makes a request to a login URL, the get token URL. The token is sent back to the front end, and the front end stores it in the local storage, so whenever it must make an authenticated request, it would add it to the header, the authorization header, as we've seen before. So these are the 2 main important login URLs. We've got the get token URL, which uses this view, which is provided by Django REST auth. And we've got this refresh token view for where you would send a token and get a fresh token back. And this is a view that's from Django REST Framework JWT. In fact, this view, I think it uses just REST Framework JWT view inside it. So yeah, you've got the mixtures of views here, but that's useful. This is how the front end would do it. This is jQuery, JavaScript, I guess. So you've got a post request, and in the post request, you write your backend URL. This is the URLs we saw. Token back, you would map it, so you would store that token in a key storage value, the local storage key value storage of the browser, so that you can use it on further requests, authenticated requests. So we're moving on to registration. As I said, registration, I wanted it to be with email verification. And in this case, I couldn't use the default views that allauth provides for this. So I'm using REST auth and Django allauth for this. This would be the workflow. The front end sends the email, password 1 and password 2, to a specific registration API endpoint, and would get a response if this is something that can be done, if the email is not there, if the passwords match, and would get a response. This would trigger the sending of an email with a link. This link is not a link in Django, or a link living in Django. It's a link living in the front end. So this link would send you to this email, verify email front end URL that would the front end would strip out the key, send the key in another AJAX request to the verify email, and you would get a response ending the registration process. So how is this handled? You've got to have REST auth and REST auth registration, which is an optional package. And I'm defining this settings variable for the front-end confirmation email URL. We'll see how to put it there. I'm using an account, a custom adapter. These are from allauth. The custom adapter is something I use to insert that URL in the email for confirmation. So I wanted it to be email authentication, and it had to be mandatory. These are the relevant templates for the email. They had to be overridden. These are provided by allauth, but I'm overriding them to include this front-end URL for confirmation. So here are the two URLs I showed you before in the diagram with the registration workflow. Registration and registration verify email will be REST auth registration views, URLs and views. And these are views that are provided by allauth that are not useful anymore. So basically they have to be there, because if not, this is going to complain, because they're going to look for these two URLs. But you could insert here a template view, or I just put an API view to have them protected with the default method. And this is the custom adapter, which will allow you to, which gives you a get email confirmation URL. This is from allauth, and that's something you can override, so you can insert the email, the URL to the email confirmation in the front end. So testing. For testing, I'm testing that all endpoints work, the endpoints return the desired keys, desired values, and that the desired side effects are happening there. But for requests that are authenticated, I have to create a token. And this is how you create the token. These are provided by Django REST Framework JWT. So you can programmatically create the token, and then you insert it in the requests you do to endpoints which require authentication. So it's basically setting the authorization header GWT token. I'm talking a little bit about cores. In my case, I'm using no sessions, no information is stored in the database, there's no cookies. So I'm gonna tell you now why I'm using this, but basically cores, all browsers implement the same origin policy, so requests from a same origin to the server are allowed. These requests from another origin, which is not the one of the server, have to be explicitly declared in a sense, in order to avoid requests from malignant third parties. When I'm developing, I'm using a development server for Django and a development server for Angular. The development server of Django is usually in the 8000, and the front-end server for Angular client runs in 2400. So these are different origins, and Django is going to complain because the origins are different. So I can use this package called Django Cores Headers, which provides some settings variables. This is the setting variable that I'm using just to define that this is something that I allow, or you can either use this cross-origin allow all equal true in your development setting. That's something you can choose. If you're using session authentication, you have to check that the header and the cookie names match with the implementation of your frontend. For example, in Angular, this is how the header is called, and this is how the cookie is called. And there's a mismatch with Django, so you have to decide to either change your default Django settings or change your default Angular settings. What I've learned about this, I certainly learned a lot about front-end technology. I had no idea JavaScript or TypeScript or whatever, so I learned a lot. I learned that Django works really well. Django REST framework is awesome, and the third-party packages are awesome, so you can do almost anything you search, and someone had the idea before than I had, certainly. I would say that in my case, well, I've been saying a really big white lie, but it's a white lie. I'm using the admin, so I'm using template rendering by Django, and that's something you don't have to resign to not use. That's something you can still use, and I use it. The Django admin is awesome. I'm using lots of ORM. We are using big data and data analysis using Python, so for us, using Django for this backend was amazing, something that allowed the team to speak in the same language. I don't know if I would decide to do something in this case if the application wasn't that big. Andrew told us about the monolith. In this case, it's something that was useful for me, for us, but maybe if I was going to use async or smaller services, maybe Django wouldn't be the best choice, and there's stuff to consider there. To wrap up, I would like to say that, well, Django could be a way of thinking as opposed to a set of tools. Django meant to solve a series of problems, and Django is not exactly what it is. Django can be lots of stuff in the future. So if we think that we have to solve problems, Django certainly would be relevant still. And we should think about Django more of an internet framework over just a web framework. I think these are two mindsets that would make Django win and Django relevant. I believe that Django will still be relevant if we manage to leverage those paradigms and technologies. Change is like the inherent moving force of the internet, and the players in the internet that don't acknowledge this may be bound to disappear. So don't be afraid to use Django in unexpected ways, to use just parts of it. I guess you will be surprised, as I was. Thank you very much. I will be around. I'm not going to take questions right now, but you will see me around in these next 5 days. I think it's also good for the next speaker. We are in a tight schedule, so yeah, don't worry. Come and ask whatever you need, okay? Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you for your talk.